like do, say a student is, they're very academic, but their like academic activity is just like sports. That's the only thing that they do. How do us as admissions officers kind of view that type of situation? And so what I was gonna say is that again, if they're performing at a high level, like they're like a recruited athlete, like they're gonna go like get a scholarship to go where they are, like they have prospects to like to perform this like in college and beyond, that's one thing. If they're doing it for fun and they're not gonna be a pro athlete, that's another thing. Because again, that's something that they won't be doing when they get to college. So as a result, then like what is outside of academics, what is that space mean? Like what are they adding to campus if they're not going to be doing that sport?
And to add to that, that's difficult, right, for high school students to know. I thought I was a four sport athlete in high school before all this, right? So I thought I was going to the league, but you don't know that, right? And so really, it's not necessarily about the activity as much as how do you articulate what that activity has meant to you through your life and your experiences. Athletics are great, right? And we know that there's a lot of learning that goes into athletics. There's a lot of leadership, there's a lot of conflict resolution that goes into athletics, but that student has to be able to articulate that in their application. So just being on the football team is not enough, right? So to say, you know, I overcame these challenges, I was cut my first year, cut my second year, kept going back. It shows once again, your ability to articulate your adversity, your ability to articulate that experience is going to matter more than the experience itself. And that's the same thing with the volunteer experiences as well. Just showing up and picking up trash doesn't mean anything. But if you can sit there and talk about why you wanted to do that, how that impacts your community, and why you think that's important, that's what makes us take a look at that and say, okay, this activity actually mattered to that student. This activity actually had an impact on this student's
So that's helpful. I was thinking in terms of time, you know, the time that it takes if they're in AP courses and IB courses to study, and then the time to practice in the games and all the training that's required, you know, if that student feels like they could do as well academically and still participate in other extracurricular activities or not. So if their primary extracurricular activity that they list on the application is athletics, is what I was saying. But your clarification in terms of how then you interpret that, or how would you share that maybe in your college essay or something?
Right, because we see that with athletics. We also see that with students who are interested in music or art, right, who are doing these things year round. So.
And so again, I want to just be cognizant of the time. So again, with essays, the essays are really the opportunity for the student to talk to us directly, or as directly as you can through an application. So in that, you know, again, these other pieces again are things that are, again, they're common through all the other applications. But again, essays can really make a student stand out. Basically is this, if you're looking at a student, so say we're looking at, in a hypothetical situation, never that it boils down to this way, but we have two students. They're both 4.0 students. They all perform, you know, like similar, like, you know, extracurricular activities. They look the same on paper. How do you make the decision of like one over the other? Again, those essays can really make a difference in understanding who a student is, what they offer to a campus, how do they think about the world, how they might necessarily fit inside that college campus and that college community. We get a lot of that information from the essays. And so again, when you're thinking about those essays, again, I think some of the things I'll really point out here really quickly is that, again, answer the question, follow the directions. If the prompt is saying a specific thing, again, I know like some students work on their essays a lot and they get married to a single story, and that can be really important. You can't just force cram it inside an application where it doesn't answer the question at all. So again, you know, your essay should be enough to where it can be adaptable to answer the questions that the essays are asking. When you fill out the common application, or most applications, there's going to be a pretty general, like large essay that they'll be doing. And so again, just keep that in mind, that again, you want to make sure that whatever they're asking, you're able to answer that question with the story that you're trying to tell. And so again, from there, proofread your essays, because again, when you're reading so many essays and people have been working on this for so long, it can be pretty easy to spot out like a grammatical error or a misspelled word when so many students have been crafting these essays for a while. So just making sure that you're like double checking your work. So again, you guys can play a really important role in helping the student in being a proofreader for those essays to make sure it's solid in that way. Write about your life. In your life. So again, if the student might have been at a situation where they've been fortunate enough to not have to go through any type of struggle, they don't have to write about a struggle. That's not their life. Write about their story, what they've gone through, how they think about the world. Put that, again, in the application. A couple of don'ts that I will point out not to do is that, again, Don't, again, repeat things that are already inside the application, because that's gonna be a missed opportunity. So again, if we know you're a good, like, a good student, or you did this in this class, you don't have to talk about that. Unless you're telling us something new, giving us context about that, then again, that might be helpful, but again, you might also be able to use additional information for that. So again, we really want to learn about you, the student, and so with that extension of that, again, if you have like someone that's been like a role model in your life or something like that, again, they can write about that person, but it's important to point out what that person meant to them. Because again, that person might have been really great. Grandma might have been an awesome person and you love them very much, but if we're not admitting her, we're admitting the student. So making sure you're helping the student really guide their essay to talk about themselves. And then the last piece is just really, really making sure that, again, don't be too opinionated. Because again, humans are reading these applications. It is possible to be offensive. And in that way, we don't want you to have such strong opinions that you're off-putting. In that sense, you can have an opinion, like your point of view about something, but don't be so strong to the point where you can be offensive. So that's what I'll point out about the essays. And so now I'll let Femi talk really quickly about the application
Question. Yes.
With the college essay or personal statement, is there a particular length that you're looking for, and is this thing is too long?
So the Common Application limits the characters. The Coalition application also is going to limit the characters. I think it's 500 words, something like that. And so, yeah, we do get students who try to kind of fit a novel in there. But there's typically going to be a limit depending on the question. And then also on the supplemental applications for each institution, there's going to be essay prompts, short answer prompts. Those are typically like 250 words, something like that.
Yeah, and then some applications, they might actually like cut you off. And so like you'll think you're typing a lot of things, but they'll actually do a hard cutoff. So again, you want to be cognizant of that length, because again, if you turn in an incomplete application, we'll be able to kind of like tell, because it will seem cut off at a certain point. So the idea is like, tell your story, but try to be succinct as you can possibly be.
Good question. Good question. So I want to talk a little bit about the application timeline starting really before the junior year. So we know that the college-going culture needs to start before the student gets into their upperclassmen levels of high school. And so before the junior year, we always encourage people, like Yancy said before, find the test prep opportunities that are in your area. If you can take the PSAT, do that. I've been talking about academic alignment kind of all morning today. Take part in the extracurricular activities that are important to the student and not just for the college applications. Once again, we're looking for students who are passionate about the things that they're looking to study and to learn. In the junior year, typically around this time of year in March and in April, students should be taking their first SAT or ACT. I know that there are some school districts that provide that to the junior class, but if you are in a school district that does not, it's important that we are encouraging our students to take advantage of the SAT opportunities as early as junior year. Once again, we are going to encourage students to take it more than once, and so getting that first one out of the way is really, really important before they head into the summer of their senior year. In April, students should really start to think about the colleges, once again talking about fit, all of those different components. So not even necessarily thinking about college, but thinking about what is your fit. So do you want a big school? Do you want a small school? Do you want a private school? What are the majors that you might be interested in? Things like that. All right. In May, you should also determine we encourage students to determine the list of recommenders. And so that's when they should figure out, am I going to have my biology teacher write my letter of recommendation, or am I going to have my head coach write my letter of recommendation? They want to figure those things out. We know that in, I believe in California, what is it? It's like 500 to 1 student to counselor ratio, right? And so it's important that if you're going to have a counselor write that letter of recommendation, that you get on that counselor's radar as soon as you possibly can. And so that's what we're always encouraging our students to do. In June and August, that's when they really should start visiting colleges. You can actually start visiting colleges even before this as well. The more colleges that you visit, the more colleges that you're exposed to, the better knowledge you'll have of what you want and what you don't want. And so we always encourage students to visit colleges, start that college application essay over the summer, right? That way, once again, if it's going to have many revisions or edits, you've at least gotten that application started before the senior year. The senior year in September, you should be meeting with the guidance counselor and finalizing that college list. You should go to college fairs or attend the colleges that are local to you. Colleges should be coming into the high schools and doing presentations, or there should be college fairs in your area, so we should really be making sure that students go in there, not just to talk to the schools that are on their list, but also to discover new institutions that might have some of the things that fit that fit profile that they've created for themselves. In October, the application process should actually also begin. I'm actually going to go back. In June and August, you should see here, you can start filling out the common application. The common application goes live typically in late July, early August, and so students can start filling that out. Like I mentioned before, it's a very rich application, and so it's important that students really start participating in that process as soon as possible, creating that profile. Even if you don't have your school list necessarily completely ready yet, create that academic profile, or create your common application profile for yourself. Skipping down to back to October, looking for opportunities to once again visit those schools. October is another opportunity for you to take some standardized testing, right? And so taking that test again is really, really important. We do SuperScore. Someone asked us about SuperScoring before. So there's two things that institutions are doing right now. They're doing SuperScoring and they're doing score choice, right? SuperScoring is when institutions are going to take your highest subscores of mixed testing to create the best test that's possible. Right? And so we'll take your highest SAT math, your highest SAT verbal, your highest SAT writing, no matter which test that you took. Score choice is when students who have taken multiple tests have to submit an entire history of their scores, or you have to send one sitting exam. So you don't get to pick the highest subscores. You either pick your October SAT or your March SAT. So it's important to know the difference between score choice and SuperScoring when you're seeing that on colleges' websites and things like that, because there's a major difference there in how they're reviewing those. Yes, ma'am?
What about SAT subject tests?
Yes, so SAT subject tests are typically not recommended for most institutions, but some institutions do require them. And so it's important to know that, once again, when you're looking at these different colleges, which colleges or which universities do require the SAT subject test and do not. If an institution does not require the SAT subject test, it's always another good opportunity for a student to showcase some talent if they decide to take that. But if it's not required by the institution, it's completely up to the student as to whether or not they want to take that test.
Do you require it?
Here at Stanford?
No, we don't require it, we just recommend it. So again, it's, like I said, it's another way to make your application look well if you did well in the test. So if a student is going to do it, we recommend them do it in an area that they're really good at. So if they're already going to be doing science, again, take the math subject test or a science one, just to kind of like bolster the fact that you're really strong in that area.
Yes, sir.
You recommend the SAT or the ACT?
So I'm from upstate New York, right? And so in upstate New York on the East Coast, not many people are taking the ACT, to be perfectly honest with you. The SAT kind of rules all. And so the tests are both standardized exams. They pretty much are testing you on the same material. The major difference is the layout of the test. And so whether you have 40 minutes, 5 sections of 40 minutes or 7 sections of 30 minutes, that's really the difference, which is why Yancy was saying that you should try it either or, because the tests, a student could do better just based off of the layout of the test. So I don't really suggest one over the other. I think it's kind of apples to apples, to be perfectly honest with you. But for the student, a student might see their test scores really jump when they switch from one test to another, just simply because of how the tests are laid out.
Yeah, and historically, like over time, the ACT has been better for students of color. But again, the tests are actually coming a lot closer to look very similar. And most colleges don't have a preference of one over the other. So again, it's either or. That's why we recommend taking each one so you can just see which test you do better on.
Okay. Where was I? Okay, November. So complete applications. I always encourage students to have their applications completed by Thanksgiving. No matter what the application deadline is, regular decision, early decision, all applications should be completed around the Thanksgiving time. Specifically, if you're applying early decision or early action, those deadlines are typically around November 15th. Some may even be around November 1st, and so being mindful of that. But if a student also is a regular decision student, they should really get their application in by then as well if they can. So the earlier that you can get your application in, the better. That way, once again, students can kind of wait until the end of their senior year when they got prom and all that other good stuff, so they don't have to spend time doing that in that second semester of their senior year. Okay? In their senior year continued in January, it's important that students fill out the FAFSA form. And so it is really, really important that students get on this form, and we know that this form can really hold up students for a variety of reasons. One of the main reasons it's a really detailed form. Another reason is because it requires parental involvement. And so it's important that students know that they got to get their FAFSA, and also the CSS profile, which can be found on College Board. Some institutions require both. Some institutions will require just the FAFSA, and some institutions will only take a look at the CSS profile. And so it's important to know what is necessary. Depending on the institution, when you get your applications in, your financial aid applications, and can determine the amount of scholarships or the amount of financial aid that's available to you. So it's really, really important that you get these things in sooner than later. And we encourage our students to do that much earlier in the process. Did you have a question?
I was just gonna ask, the CSS, is that primarily for private independent schools?
No, not necessarily. Yep. Yes, sir.
What is the CSS
So the CSS profile is a similar application. It's another form that students can fill out. It's looking more at parental assets than just taxes compared to the FAFSA form. Depending on the institution, they will take a look at that as well when creating their financial aid packages. And so it's important to, once again, it's important to know because some institutions might require both. So that'll be important for everyone to know.
What is that?
The CSS profile, what's CSS?
CSS. I don't know.
I can't remember. It's college scholarship service.
Services, I think, it's like if you go to an independent school, high school, you fill out a similar, it's a third party that takes and collects all the information, integrates it, and sends it to
The institutions, right?
So I think it's a service that the school, I think it's called.
It's through the College Board.
Yeah. It's on the College Board website. Yeah. And then in April is the yield events, right? So decisions will typically go out mid to late March. April comes around, and that's when you should start getting information about opportunities for admitted student programs, and it's really important that students go to admitted student programs. Once again, when you start looking at student success, the likelihood that a student is going to succeed on a campus when they have gone to that campus sight unseen is a lot lower than if they actually visited that campus during their college application process, including in the yield phases. And so if a student is admitted, when a student is admitted to these colleges, making sure that they go and they visit these campuses will really help with that transition when they decide to deposit at these different schools. Also, decisions about the waitlist will go out. It's important that students accept waitlist decisions, right? Just because you get a waitlist letter in the mail does not mean that you're actually on the waitlist. If you read those letters, 9 times out of 10, it requires you to do some sort of action to say, yes, I would like to be on your waitlist. And so if you are interested in these waitlists, these institutions that you might have been waitlisted to, you have to respond to the institution and actually get on their waitlist, okay? And then in May, the deposit deadline, the decision deadline, once again, it's important that students pay those deposits. There are deposit fee waivers for a variety of institutions as well, and so asking those questions to see if you can get the deposit waived is also really, really important. That's one of those things that aren't necessarily published, but if you ask, many institutions do have deposit waivers. Yes, ma'am?
Okay, so if, say for instance, you're waitlisted for Stanford, but then you have to make a decision by May 1st and pay the deposit, how long after you waitlist you let them know whether or not they got in?
That's a great question. That depends on the school. And so the school will typically, if the deposit deadline is May 1st, a lot of times what we're doing is we start to run our numbers around May 10th or so, because to be perfectly honest with you, May 1st is the hard published deadline. But trust me, if you want to send us your money on May 2nd, we'll take it, right? And so we typically start looking at our freshman class numbers around May 15th to late May to see what the deposits look like. Is there any class space available? And a lot of times students won't know if they're off the wait list until like June. And so if you are waitlisted at an institution, you should get yourself on the wait list, but prepare to move on to the institutions that you were admitted to. Yeah. Good question. All right, and so we're going to talk to you briefly about things that things to consider throughout this whole application process. We should know, everyone in this room I think knows that the college application process is being gamed on both sides, right? So I mentioned before that students are applying to 16 or 10 to 12 institutions, right? You're only going to go to one. We also know that students are not necessarily visiting all of their institutions. And so I want to give you, and we as admissions folks know that. And so when we're making decisions, there's a lot that kind of goes into some of these things. So I want to talk to you guys about some of that stuff. Interest qualification, right? So not here at Stanford, but at other institutions that I've worked at, interest qualification or demonstrated interest is a thing, and it's real. I've worked at institutions, and I have colleagues that have worked at institutions where if you have not called, if you have not visited, if you have not emailed your counselor or somebody from that office, they're not even reading your application, regardless of your grades, regardless of your scores. It's because you didn't show interest. And so there's this thing that's out there called these ghost applicants, right? Applications that just fall out of the sky. The student has never ever reached out to your institution. They've never actually showed interest, right? So a lot of institutions say, because we know that you're applying to 12 schools, and you likely did visit somebody, the chances of us yielding you is extremely low if you've never been in contact with us, right? Interest qualification is something that is real. It is something that when you ask, they will not tell you about. And so I'm letting all of you guys know that this is something that is in the field. And you don't know how this is weighed. You don't know if this is going to be weighed when it comes to your scholarship. You don't know if this is going to be, and you don't know if this is going to be weighed versus your admittance. But it's something that is real, which is why I encouraged you guys before, if you have students that are interested in institutions, even if they're across the country, send an email to a counselor. Get on their website, give them a phone call. When you're giving them a phone call, leave your name, leave your number, tell them what high school that you're coming from. All of that stuff, because all of that stuff is documented, all of that stuff is put into your potential applicant file, and it shows that a student is interested. And it's important that you know that you encourage your students to do it, not the parents to do it, even not the counselors to do it. Demonstrated interest a lot of times has to do with the student's active involvement and interest in the institution. Determining the support networks that exist at the institution is also really, really important. And this is not just academic support, right? It's also the social support, right? Most institutions in the country are predominantly white institutions. So what are those institutions doing to make their students of color comfortable? What are those institutions doing to promote the diversity that exists on their campus? Are there diverse issues on their campus, right? Knowing those things and how the institution serves those things is going to be really, really important. My mom always used to tell me, you know what you're interested in and we know what you value based on where you spend your money. That's the same thing for colleges, right? So if the college has, multicultural centers, or if they have diverse faculty, or if they have those things, those are great tools, and those are great markers for you to determine whether or not that school has the support networks and the support systems that you may need. Okay?
There's a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. So when we come to events like this, or go to Penn State, or for summer, and invited to all these different programs, does any of that count? You guys
Yeah.
look at that, or does today count?
Yeah, today does count. And so what's going to happen today is that, today counts. So what's going to happen today, right, is after we leave here, we're going to get a list of all of the different, we're going to get a list of all of you, right, and all the organizations that you represent. And so what that allows us to do is when we say, okay, these students are coming from these organizations, whether it's the Boys and Girls Club, whether it's any one of these community-based organizations, high school, or what have you, the engagement that we have, the more relationships that you can build within those admissions offices, the more advocates that you have within those admissions offices. So yes, this definitely counts.
Yeah, we don't officially, we're not a tally marker that says you came 4 or 5 times. But like I said, this does count. One, because like I said, it's space time. You get to get questions answered that you can use for the student that just makes their application stronger.
Right.
So again, it matters because they're getting this experience. They get a chance to see this campus that they might not have had otherwise, and that can help go a long way to their conviction towards the school when they fill out the application.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
have a question. Why is Stanford so low in their admissions for college? Is it because they don't find the quality kind of student that they're looking for, or you just don't have the availability?
So that's a great question. Her question was, why is Stanford so selective? Is it because of the quality of applications that we're getting, or is it because of the limited seat availability? And I can tell you for a fact it's because of the size of our institution when it comes to the freshman class. We had this year we got over 44,000 applications, and we're trying to fill 1,750 slots. So based off of the applications alone, we have to be selective, right? And to be perfectly honest with you, when we read applications, we see students by the boatload that can absolutely do the work here, but we have to make tough decisions simply because we can't over-enroll. If we over-enroll, the college will come for us, right? And so we only have a certain amount of residence halls. We do our best to keep our student-to-faculty numbers, student-to-faculty ratios low. And so that's the reason, that's the ultimate driver for why our applications, or why we are so selective, aside from the fact that, you know, it's,
Yeah, so if we're like 20 years ago, or not even that, 10 years ago, we barely got over 20,000 applications.
but a lot of that has to do with how many schools students were applying to,
Yeah.
right? And so 10 years ago, students were applying to only 2 or 3 schools, 3 or 4 schools. Once again, the common application allows you to apply to schools by the click of a button. So kids don't have to fill out the application the way that we had to. So your lists are a lot longer, your lists are a lot stronger than they were before.
Yeah, but the class sizes like remained the same for almost 30 years. So it's
Right.
always been that number, but the applications have grown. And another thing in terms of like the quality applications, we definitely get them. Actually, 80% of students that apply to Stanford that have like above, like they have perfect test scores and 4.0 and above GPAs don't get in. And so again, they're there, but that's also not the only thing that we're looking for. And so again, as it comes to that, the quality of the student, we see that in different ways other than just having those numbers, those scores.
So what percentage of minorities, or is there a certain percentage of minorities, African Americans, that you look at ratio?
Well, we don't have a quota, so
There's
it's-
no,
I'm-
yeah, no, that's a great question. There's no critical mass. There is no critical mass for, we have to have a certain number of African Americans, Latino, Asian, Native Americans. However, we're pushing for every last one of them, right? And so we are making sure that our class is diverse. And I can tell you again, when you compare Stanford to other institutions, specifically when you start looking at, especially our competitors, so like the Ivies and the Dukes and the MITs, the diversity of our class is well above and beyond the pale when you're comparing us to our competitors. Yes, ma'am.
You spoke to this earlier, but give me a number in terms of class size for freshmen. What's the average class size, or what's the max?
The average class size?
So 17 is about 1,700 to 1,750 every year.
No,
in
she's
terms
talking
of
about
classroom.
actual classrooms.
Structure, we're talking-
Oh, the average class size is 15 to 16.
Oh.
Yeah, 15 to 16 students. Yes, sir.
What is the percentage of African Americans in this school?
In this incoming freshman class, I can tell you that
The whole school period.
overall, we're
About 10%.
about, yeah, somewhere between 10 and 12% actually, because I know that the senior class, I think, had a heavy population of, and that's just African American students, so not all diverse. We break that number down, and so it's like 10, I think it's, I know this entering freshman class was 10.6% African Americans, 15.5% first generation students, and so we're constantly pushing that envelope to get as many as we can.
Just wondering, you went to UCLA, 30% black.
Yeah, I saw that.
Same way the athletes is
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, and then this is which we will not have time for, like that's a larger discussion about the whole affirmative action issue, where like again, private schools, why another reason why students should be considering this is that those state schools, the UCLA's and UC Berkeley's, again, Prop 209 really cancel out their opportunities to consider race when they're looking at applications. Private schools don't have that issue. So that's why students should be really keeping their options open to what type of schools they're looking at, because the private schools have the ability to say, like, we're looking at, like, oh, if we want to get more African American students, we can tell in the application who they are, who they're not.
All right, but before, there's hands going up. Let me just finish. All right. So, because I do want to answer every question in here. So, student loans. Students of color are the highest percentage of students who have student loans without degrees. And so it's really, really important that as we encourage students, college is expensive, right? It is expensive beyond belief at this point in time. And so there's two things about that. Student loan debt is real, right? And it's important that students understand that it is an investment in yourself, but that investment can only be returned if you actually graduate, right? So we have to make sure that it's not just about college access, but it's also about college success when they get here, right? Beware of the sticker shock, right? We have to also encourage students, once again, to get over what that initial cost of an institution might be, because what a college costs is not what you pay, right? And we know that. So it's important that students and families know that, because I don't think that there's any real system that exists out there that's like that, right? If a car costs a certain amount of money, you're paying that amount of money. If a house costs a certain amount of money, you're paying that amount of money. College is not like that, right? So once again, Stanford costs $72,000 a year, but for a family who makes under $65,000, it's free, right? So we have to make sure that people know that when they're applying to the colleges that are out there. An application must be put in motion early to be on time, right? And so that goes again back to that timeline where students are working on their college essays even before their senior year. It's important to get all those things in motion. Find your recommenders at the end of your junior year, so that way you can get all of your stuff in motion. And also, and the final piece is really, really important, and that is that college admissions does not determine students' value. If you do not get into a school, that does not mean that you are not smart. And it's really, really important that as we encourage these students to reach for these institutions, that we talk about things like the fact that 80% of the students with perfect SATs and perfect transcripts don't get in, right? So it's more, when we're looking at college applications, it's more than just your grades, right? And so students don't necessarily see that, students don't necessarily believe that, but that's the fact. That is a fact. And so it's important that we, while we encourage them to reach and go for all those institutions that are really, really great, there's tons of institutions that are great. I did not go to Stanford, and I'm doing just fine. Right? So there's plenty of really, really great colleges that are out there for students. So don't let them get hung up on, you know, the Ivies or even on institutions like Stanford, because education can be really enriching no matter where you go. Okay?
So before we jump into questions, what I want to do, we actually have a couple of students who we wanted to bring up on stage to help answer some of these questions. Because again, we can talk to you guys as admissions officers, and again, we're going to stay here to be able to answer the questions that you guys have. But I think it's also important to get a little bit of the student perspective as well. So you can understand that like these are students who have gone through this process much more recently than we have, and just understand how some of these things actually come into play when we're having this conversation and having these discussions. So we're going to bring them on stage really quick and get a couple of chairs for them. While we're getting them up, we'll try, because you guys are slated to have lunch in a little bit, so we have about 15 to 20 minutes for questions, and I want to make sure you guys get to the food as quickly as possible. So then we got a little bit of time. We have a little bit of time.
We can all start together. So I know there were some hands that I kind of skipped earlier. Yes, ma'am. If a student has been, so her question was in regards to, yeah. That looks absolutely fine. Once again, so I'm sorry, so for anyone who didn't hear, she talked about a student, your son, I believe, right, who has been playing athletics all his life. He's in club sports, he's in varsity sports, but he has no intention of pursuing athletics at the college level or at the professional level. So how do we look at that if a student has been actively involved with that, but that's not necessarily their interest moving forward, right? And so for us, that goes back to the ability to articulate about what you learned through that experience. There is no single experience that a student is going to participate in that I'm going to sit there and I'm going to see it and I'm going to be, oh man, we got to get this kid because they did that. It's all about how that student is able to articulate that experience, that impact, what that impact has done for them, what you have learned through those experiences, right? And so that's what matters when we're reading that application. So when we're looking at this long list of different extracurricular activities and things like that, it's all about the impact of the student's ability to talk about what those things mean, more so than just soccer player, or more so than just volunteer.